I think a lot of them say that like I could go without sex for the rest of my life. I'm fine. Like I don't need it. And a lot of what I see is that the difficulty in putting themselves first, of saying like my pleasure matters. And when I say pleasure, I don't mean just sexual pleasure. I mean any joy or happiness. Like that's literally what pleasure means. And a lot of times when people hear the word pleasure, they get fixated on the sexual pleasure part of it. But really, when a woman struggles to receive or accept sexual pleasure, I see it also in other areas of her life too.
Hey there, beautiful soul. Welcome to Cultivate Your Joyful Life, where we believe true fulfillment blooms from within. I'm Emily Liou, your certified life coach, and I'm on a mission to help you create a life you freaking love. In a world where we constantly juggle priorities from career to parenting, relationships to health, it's easy to feel overwhelmed or not enough. But don't worry, in this corner of the universe, I'm here to share practical tips and inspiration to help you access your inner joy right now. So, grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's cultivate your joyful life together. Here we go. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the show. So today we are talking about how to prioritize and welcome more pleasure with our guest expert, Courtney Boyer. I'll read her bio in just a bit. But what I want to start off by saying is that I think either people feel really comfortable talking about sex, or it's a topic that people avoid at all costs. Like sometimes it might even be uncomfortable talking to your lifelong partner, like your spouse, about sex, because we have just been taught that it's this dirty, secret thing that we should just not talk about. And I really wanted to talk to Courtney today about that, along with the differences in how men and women look and feel about sex. And also a lot of the questions that I see in forums that people are too afraid to ask people in their real lives about. Because again, sex is one of those things that just feel very personal and private that we don't want to air our dirty laundry about. But, you know, there are a lot of relationships where people struggle with sexual intimacy, and we dive into all of it. But all of that being said, I also want to share with you that this goes beyond just intimacy and physical sexual encounters. What you're going to learn from Courtney is something that I really believe in as well, and something that I talk to my life coaching clients about, which is each and every one of us needs to build and incorporate a daily pleasure practice in our lives. We're going to talk more about what that is, how to do it, but just know that this episode stems beyond just the physical, intimate relationships. It also really talks about the relationship with yourself and how to build that. Even if you're single, like you don't have any sexual encounters in this time of your life, that's okay. You're still going to get a ton out of this episode. So without further ado, let me read Courtney's bio. Courtney Boyer is a relationship and sexuality expert and author of Not Tonight, Honey, Why Women Actually Don't Want Sex and What We Can Do About It. She has been featured in publications including Parents, The Huffington Post, Cosmopolitan, and Yahoo. Courtney believes that we can reclaim our power through our sexuality, and she helps her clients solve their relationship and sex problems. For 2024, Courtney is focused on offering small group and one-on-one concierge sexual wellness retreats around the world. As her work in this field develops, Courtney is drawn to the emerging field of epigenetics, neuropsychology, and energy work. She is trained in evidence-based methods like NLP, EMDR, IFS, and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. I had so much fun chatting about sex with Courtney, and I hope you enjoyed this episode as well. Let's dig in. Awesome, Courtney. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. I am so excited to talk about sex.
Me too.
I feel like it's one of those taboo topics that people like are kind of hush-hush about, yeah. But I would say that it's intimacy and sexuality is a part of us. And it's so important to have a healthy relationship with that. So I guess just so our audience can get to know you, where do you live?
I live in Germany.
In Jersey?
Germany, Deutschland.
Oh, Germany. Oh my gosh. I was like, it cut out a little bit. Did you
Sorry.
say Jersey? Okay, Germany. What
Germany.
city?
It's a very small city. It's about an hour and a half south of Frankfurt.
Okay. I've been to Frankfurt.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I've been to Munich during Oktoberfest.
Oh, okay. Great.
Germans know how to party.
They do. Yeah, they do.
You have a book called Not Tonight, Honey, Why Women Actually Don't Want Sex and What We Can Do About It. So can we just start there? And I'd love to hear, like, what's the background behind this book?
Yes. So I've been in the sexuality field for about 17 years. And in that time, I have come across so many women who would ask me two questions. I mean, just almost always, especially when I speak to groups, is, am I broken and what's wrong with me? And those two questions really inspire, finally create like a resource, but in a way that it felt digestible for them to help to understand that when they're not alone, and they're definitely not broken and there's nothing wrong with them, and really help like them understand what's going on, why they may have a low sexual desire, why they may feel disconnected from their bodies, and then where to go from there.
Oh, that is so needed. And yeah, it's just so important to know, like, no, you're not broken.
Yeah.
There's all these factors at play. I know you just listed them out, but can you dive into a little bit more about the context behind each one and where they kind of stem from?
Sure. In terms of which, like low desire or disconnection?
A low desire.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So low desire there's to this stage of life. So if you are a brand new mom, sex is at the bottom of your priority list, right? Like sleep, figuring out.
Don't touch me.
Yes.
Don't touch me right now.
I'm touched out. I have no desire to, oh my gosh. So if you are grieving, maybe you had a loss, your move, hormonal changes. So, even if you're, postpartum, perimenopausal, menopausal, those all big things. Medications can affect desire. So there are a lot of external things that can contribute to low desire, but also what I see as like one of the biggest internal culprits is a woman feeling like she doesn't deserve pleasure. And so there's that disconnection to survive that for, maybe a history of sexual trauma or just this overwhelming, pervasive feeling of unworthiness.
Yeah. I'd love to actually dig into that one. I feel like the other stuff we understand, right? That's like a season of life. Just don't feel like we have the energy for it. And maybe that's also like hormonal imbalance or things like that. Yeah. But what you hit on right there is like the self-worth. Like, am I deserving of love? Am I capable of having an attraction or being attractive? And I'd love for you to just dive into a little bit more about what are the common things those women are saying that lead them to feel like they're broken or to blame.
Yeah, I think a lot of them say that, like, I could go without sex for the rest of my life. I'm fine. Like, I don't need it. And a lot of what I see is that the difficulty in putting themselves first, of saying, like, my pleasure matters. And when I say pleasure, I don't mean just sexual pleasure. I mean any joy or happiness. Like, that's literally what pleasure means. And a lot of times when people hear the word pleasure, they get fixated on the sexual pleasure part of it. But really, when a woman struggles to receive or accept sexual pleasure, I see it also in other areas of her life too. And so it's just this that may make her uncomfortable because she's never felt like, again, she's worthy of receiving that. And then, okay, so what's the root cause of women feeling like they don't deserve that? And what I have like really boiled it down to in the most succinct way is the reason why women struggle with feeling worthy to receive pleasure is because as little girls, we were taught to self-abandon so that we could be loved and accepted by the people in our lives, the most important people to us. And so what we did is we deserted our desires. We disconnected from the things that like lit us up and brought us joy and made us curious because we needed to, nope, that's not going to make you any money, or nope, that's not what nice girls do, or, whatever the messaging was. And so in order to be accepted and loved, which is an evolutionary need, okay, yeah, right. I'm going to disconnect from those things. And then we've just never made our way home back to ourselves.
I just love what you highlighted there. And that makes complete sense because you're right. So many women grow up with that messaging to be a good girl. Or there's also that like stigma. I know pleasure's not always about sex, but like, a lot of people grow up with religious stories handed down to them, which is like love is dirty or like intimacy is dirty. And so we kind of demonize all of that growing up. We were talking about the self-worth and how that tends to stem into like, I'm not deserving of love, or I need other people's needs before mine. And therefore my pleasure, my joy, my happiness doesn't really matter. And I think that's such a big theme that a lot of women can resonate with. Is like, we're always sacrificing for other people's well-being over ours, or prioritizing everyone else is taken care of and we put our cup last. So I'm just curious how you support people through that. If they're identifying with like, oh yeah, I neglect myself or my needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things is really going to where that showed up when you were a kiddo. And so exploring what were the messaging that you got from your parents and really that love, and it wasn't safe. And so, taking them through exercises where they're able to heal that inner child and to tell them that I'm here to protect you now. I'm here to show you that it's safe to seek pleasure, to receive pleasure, to just, go after those things. So a lot of it is really connecting with those parts of us that feel vulnerable and feel unseen, and helping to recognize them and heal them.
Inner child healing is like one of my most favorite things because so much of us are responding or reacting from a little triggered child inside of us. And oftentimes we just need to upgrade that, be like, okay, that was then and things are completely different now and we're safe and I got you. So I really love that you're doing more of the deeper healing in the work so that they can upgrade that system to say, I am worthy and deserving of pleasure and happiness. I'm just really curious because I know you mentioned like the book is about like women not wanting to have sex. And I hear as a newish mom, I have 2 kids under 4.
Okay.
I know a lot of women who are just like, if my husband would help out more, like I feel like I'm just doing all the invisible labor and then he comes back from work and he wants to be intimate and I just have no desire. Like, I'm curious if you're seeing a lot of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. 100%. Yeah. A lot of women are really, frustrated because, they do. They feel like there's an expectation to do it all and there's not a shared team approach.
Yeah. And so that I think has more layers of resentment built in where like the relationship or the intimacy can't be connected as much. There's so many reasons why like somebody wouldn't want to be sexually intimate. I'm curious, like what is a healthy, like if you're in a relationship, what do you consider healthy then?
You mean in terms of frequency?
Yeah. Or like quality.
Yeah, I think I know that people love like a black and white answer on this. Like, okay, you should be having sex
How many times a day should we be scheduling this?
Yes. I need 2 orgasms a week and they should last, simultaneous. No, I think that it really depends on the couple and the arrangement that they have. And so I think that there's this belief that marriage or, long-term partnerships or romantic partnerships should look a certain way. And what we're seeing is that like, that's just a really unhelpful way of looking at relationship styles.
Yeah.
So what I try to do is when people ask me that, I validate, like, yeah, of course we want to feel normal, or we want to feel better than normal. Like, okay, phew, I'm having sex way more than that. Like, okay, I'm okay. But it's only one, way to measure the health of a relationship. I think if both partners are completely satisfied with having sex once a month and it feels meaningful and connecting and it is really great, then I'm not going to tell them that, yeah, you guys really need to like step it up to once a week, because that's what like statistics show or quote couples do. It's more for me, I call them sexpectations. Are the sexpectations being discussed? Are the needs being met? Are either partner denying certain desires? And if none of those things negatively are impacting the relationship, then I think you have a recipe for success. The key is staying connected via communication.
Yeah. Oh, I love the word expectations.
Yeah.
And I'm also just hearing like having shared goals. Like it doesn't have to be quantity over quality or quality over quantity, but just being able to express to your partner, like, hey, this is my desire. And I'm curious, like, what would make intimacy, like, what's intimacy mean to you? And really being able to have those conversations, I feel like it requires a level of vulnerability, because I know some people get shut down, or they feel like I've expressed it to my partner and they made me feel dirty, or like, I have these kinks or like these desires that like my partner is not on board and I just feel really judged. And I don't know if you would agree to this, but I've heard like that's why a lot of people will rather cheat on someone, because it's more of like a transaction, whereas in an actual relationship, like to be intimate, it's like you're really allowing that other person to see you. There's like a layer of vulnerability that needs to be there. Oh, so I don't know if you've heard of that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I see in like the dating trend of like situationships or friends with benefits, is that really prevents people from having to take off that layer and be vulnerable. Like, because I can keep you at arm's length because you're just a friend, right? That we happen to mess around or, get my sexual needs met, which they're not demonizing that if that's really the purpose of it. What I find concerning is when there is a track record of friends with benefits and situationships, and the person isn't doing the deeper work to make those like really intimate. And when I say intimate, I don't mean sexual, but like emotionally intimate connections, because that's how we learn. Like relationships are practice. It's sometimes you practice with the same person for 70 years and like that's great, but if you don't have that opportunity and you lack those skills, then you never develop them.
Yeah. I love how you just called it a skill.
It is. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, it's easier to just move into that transaction, and it just doesn't require as much. And
absolutely,
it also it ties back to that self-worth that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
like that could be really frightening to a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
And or they just don't feel like they're deserving of it, like a true love.
Yes, all of the above. I completely agree.
Yeah. And all of that kind of stems back into the deeper healing work around like, what is your belief system around love, or like what stories were handed to you that tell you that you're undesirable or unlovable?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or unworthy.
Yeah. Or that love doesn't last, or that it's not safe to be loved because people leave. I mean, there's just so many layers of uncovering that. And it is a lot safer emotionally to just stay on that outer level of like, yep, I'm just going to get these basic needs met. And again, that's fine. But we really, I think, don't realize, especially the younger generation, like what a disservice we're doing to ourselves when we don't have intimate relationships where we are accountable, where we are vulnerable, where we have to show up, where we get to show up. And when we really get to bare our soul to somebody, and that surely submits us to this idea of suffering. Like one of the things I say is that love and suffering are two sides of the same coin.
Very true. Yeah. The way I also see it is like the greater the love, the greater the pain, like when
Absolutely.
you lose them.
Yeah,
But
100%.
you kind of, without the love, you wouldn't have any pain. So
It's true.
anyone who like really feels that, like I'm really scared of putting myself into a relationship where I could potentially break up and be devastated, or maybe they saw their parents get divorced and they're just like, love is hurtful, or love doesn't exist, or love just always ends up brokenhearted or tears families apart. I know this goes back to inner child, but any like words of wisdom for that type of person?
I think just some compassion for them feeling that way. Like, yeah, of course you would feel that way. If that was your example, if that was your experience, yeah, I would be really scared of love too. And I think then we have to go back to, okay, and then what? Like, do I want to spend my life living in fear? Do I really want to limit my ability to connect with people because I'm scared? Because that's going to be pervasive in all things, like going for certain jobs, trying new, hobbies or skills, going back to school, trying to get a degree. Like, you can use that to in any connection. And so I think that when we accept the reality that, sometimes you're going to get your heart broken. And so you have to decide, like, is it really worth the risk of putting myself out there? And that's only a decision that that person can make. Obviously, I'm a big fan of love and people choosing to open themselves up. But I think that, people have to make that conscious decision to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also am in the belief system that everything comes and unfolds at the right time in the right place.
Same.
Like, you don't want to force it. Like, you'll know. And then oftentimes, like, all of those negative relationships or even toxic relationships or hurtful situations, they all shape like the present day of being like, okay, now I'm finally ready for more. Like, I had to experience that kind of pain to be able to open up myself to the possibilities, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not every day I get to talk to a sex expert. So I want to ask this question. There's a stat I've read where like men think about sex like however many times a minute, or it's frequent. And I'm just curious, like, if you know what the stat is I'm talking about and how true is it?
Oh, I heard it. I heard this stat a long time ago. I'm trying to remember.
But it's like constant, like on their minds daily.
Yeah, what just popped into my head was like those memes where people, like men think about like the Roman Empire and like how often they.
Oh, yeah.
I
saw that TikTok.
Yeah, I think that this may not be the nicest answer, and I'm not making any generalizations here. I'm really trying not, but I think, yes, men think about sex a lot, but I don't think it's necessarily in terms of only pleasure. I think men also see sex think about sex in terms of power. And
like a power dynamic, like control.
Yes. Using like in a way to assert dominance and as a way to, be safe, like to create a sense of safety for themselves. And sure, of course, there is a pleasure aspect, and men tend to be more visual. That doesn't mean women can't be visually as well. And so we live in a very visually inundating society that is, reinforcing that exposure to sexual imagery. So yes, I think it's multifactorial that feeds that. And also the belief that like, of course it's okay for men to think about sex all the time. Of course men are going to do that. And then perpetuating that self-fulfilling prophecy of, oh yeah, I'm going to think about sex because I can think about sex because everybody expects me to think about.
And it's like hard to ignore it, especially with social media, just like any media in general. Like you said, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like prominent.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Like it's funny because I was, scrolling through Instagram Reels or whatever, and I identify as heterosexual, and I still get a fair amount of pretty, not suggestive, but sexual-ish, female sexual, selling things. So
Yeah.
companies that are using women and their bodies and sex to sell. And I'm like, I mean, it doesn't arouse me, but I can't imagine being in a man's feed of like how often they're, and I'll be honest, I have seen a shift in companies and also in influencers, male influencers or companies using men to leverage sex and to appeal to women. So I think that there's, an equal opportunity here among all, orientations and genders to play on that desire for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm just curious, that's like how men, not to generalize, but a lot of men are biologically wired. And what's the difference between women then?
I think, so what they say is that, men are visual, and that's why, women wear makeup, and women are auditory. And so that's why men lie. And so which is really a different way to look at, interactions. But I think, there are some evolutionary, components being played there in terms of visually looking at the different aspects of fertile females and how I can perpetuate my seed by selecting a good mate. And if we look at sex and as mate selection, which it may or may not be, women are looking for something that's more secure. And so they want to make sure that they had a partner historically that was going to provide for their child, especially while they were pregnant or nursing, which put them at a disadvantage if a prey came and tried to, or a predator came and tried to attack them, or another village tried to invade. And so they wanted to make sure that they had a secure, strong, financially astute, whatever partner that protected them from those things. So I think, there are some biological differences that hard to ignore, but also, culture plays a major factor as well.
It's so fascinating about like the evolution and just how we've been wired. But now I feel like there's so many female breadwinners and, so many more educated females.
Yes.
Like I think there's more women that graduating with master's or doctoral degrees compared to men. And
it's amazing.
Women are starting to like outpace men in earning potential. So I'm just really curious because I know your whole book is about like, honey, not tonight. Like, how does that play? Like, I'm really curious about how finances play into marriages and sex.
Yeah. So I think it comes to the level of respect and the view that each partner has on gender roles. So a lot of times, if you come from a family where your gender roles are pretty traditional, where the woman stays home and the man is the breadwinner, and you open to that gender role shift, there is a lot of times where men feel emasculated by their female partner if they earn more than them. It's like this value shock of like, this doesn't compute. I don't understand how to reconcile my childhood and this expectation I had for my life with my reality. And so a lot of times men will feel very emasculated and withdraw and be less interested sexually and or try to sabotage the relationship and engage in, extramarital or extra relation affairs. But I think that when we raise kids in environments where the household load is shared, where the female partner can be the breadwinner or they can be equal breadwinners, we're really conditioning our children who are growing up and hoping to be in relationships that, any dynamic is possible. I think that you have to have that foundation of respect. But if you see one sex as being different and relegated to a certain part of domestic or corporate life, then it's going to be a problem.
Thank you for sharing that, because I feel like now in 2024, more than ever, like gender roles are shifting and, both parents are going to work now. And so I think a lot of people complain, a lot of moms complain from what I've seen in forums online is like, my husband still goes to work, as do I. And then they come home and I'm still expected to manage everything and, plan the birthday party and organize all the clothes and cook dinner and clean and all of that. But what you're saying here is it really requires both parties to let go of any gender norms or gender roles that have been prescribed, and to really work together, going back to like shared goals and values. Like, how do we make this work together? And I love what you're talking about in terms of like the healthy masculine and the healthy feminine, because I read somewhere like healthy masculine is when a man feels like he's contributing. Like, that's the number one thing that he wants to do, is like just contribute and provide. And, you know, that contribution and that providing can also be like household chores and,
Absolutely.
you know, doing all those things that let go of that mental load or like the emotional load or the physical load for the woman. And then a healthy feminine is really the admiration, like feeling like you're admired. That's like what every healthy feminine wants to be, is just like admired and appreciated. And so I think if you have both of those, then regardless of how much money somebody earns, both of those healthy sides can come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting that you talk about the masculine and feminine, because one of the things that I see too with couples is that when there is no clear masculine, and masculine doesn't have man does it, but when there's no clear masculine energy and no clear feminine energy, then sex is kind of like, the polarity helps bring that charge and that connection sexually. And that's something that a lot of couples lack, because a lot of them are tired. And so like nobody wants to take charge. Like nobody wants to be like, oh, freaking A, I have to like plan this, or I have to initiate, or I have to be the one that's like pushing this. A lot of them, it tends to kind of just be like, okay, sure, yeah, if you want to do this. And so then what we see a lot of times is, you know, women tend to go into the more passive role, and then the male tends to go into the more masculine, you know, dominant role. But then they don't really necessarily want to be there. And so then he is just kind of like, and then it makes the sexual encounter not so great.
Yeah, I really appreciate you clarifying, like masculine doesn't just mean like it's in the male and feminine is just in the female. Like we all have access to that. And I think as a whole, like as an individual, we need to have a balance of when we're flexing our masculine and our feminine. But I think what you hit here too is like as a coupleship, like you also need to have a balance of healthy feminine and healthy masculine, and that can ebb and flow. But
Absolutely.
You're right. Like I can see if two people in a relationship are just so focused on corporate career and they're both working all the time and they're both in the masculine, then there's no room for the feminine to receive.
Right.
And then on the flip side of that is like, if both are, like you said, just really hands off and like, I don't really want to plan, I don't want to initiate, then like nothing happens either.
Right.
I really like that. So for people, tell me a little bit more about the book and like, what is the main takeaway you want people to know after reading this?
I think I touched a little bit on it, that I wanted them to know, especially women, like you're not alone. Like there's nothing, like you're not the first person to like have these feelings, to not want sex, to feel really discouraged, to feel resentful, then be like, yeah, I don't, or feel shame. I grew up very religious, and so that very much inspired some of the first part of the book, and looking at a lot of the messages that we receive from you know, more conservative religions that really demonize women, especially women's bodies, the idea of pleasure. Yeah, so the book is divided into 3 parts. The first part is like, why are we here? Why do we need a book on sexual desire and why women are not interested in sex? And so exploring a lot of the historical realities and traumas that have contributed to women not feeling empowered with their body, women not feeling empowered sexually, and what that reality was like for centuries and centuries. And then the second part of the book is really helping women to understand, you know, okay, so now we've got a better understanding of the culture, looking at our body response. You know, it's like a quick and dirty sex ed, where basically everything that we've been taught about how a woman's bodies work in the media is completely wrong. It is so wrong. It's a lie. And it's really been so incredibly harmful to women and really impacted the way that we view arousal and orgasms and just how to
expectations.
Expectations. Yes, that's a chapter of the book, actually. And so we talk about communication, and then the third part is really about creating a more pleasure-filled life. So I introduced the concept of, creating a pleasure practice, what that looks like, how that can help you be more present and more grounded and more open to pleasure in areas of your life. I talk about sexual energy and how that impacts our sexual being and our ability to be sexual. And then also just explore different therapeutic techniques and ways that you can seek professional help and what that would look like. So if you're like, man, I've got a lot of bags that I want to unpack, I don't know where I should start. There's so many different therapists or counselors or coaches out there. I go through some of the really helpful and most effective modalities. So that's
beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, I have so many follow-up questions to that.
Please.
I want to know, and I don't know if it's different based on a certain situation or trauma, but what are your top 3 favorite modalities?
I love internal family systems, kind of IFS. EMDR is great. Eye movement desensitization and reprocess. And then somatic work is incredible. And so that's my top 3. NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. That's also another one that's pretty good, depending on the practitioner. But those are 4 great ones.
I really love, I'm familiar with the parts IFS, NLP, somatics. I wasn't familiar with EMDR. Can you explain that one really quick?
Yeah. So EMDR was started by this woman who noticed that when she would take her patients for walks, that they seemed to process the traumas that they had so much faster and more effective. And what she realized is that when you stimulate, but it's called bilateral, so both sides of the brain at the same time, you can essentially rewire how a trauma is stored and recalled. And so what you essentially do, what the most common thing is where you follow a finger, back and forth, your therapist's finger in front of your eye back and forth while you're recalling a traumatic event. And so there's a script that they follow depending on, where you're at in that. And it helps you recall the event, and it desensitizes you to the trauma so that you can, when you recall it, you're not reliving it. You're physically not reliving it and oh my gosh, going back through all of that terror and, fear and all of that. And so it turns down the intensity eventually to a 0 of the traumatic event.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. And I love that there's just so many modalities and tools out there to help people. I just got off another podcast interview with an EFT practitioner. And I was this too. Yeah. And then there's inner child. So no matter where people are, I just hope they are listening to this and they're like, wow, there's so many different tools and ways that I can really heal this part of me that desires more pleasure and doesn't want to demonize it and actually accepts it and welcomes it and receives it. And can we just talk a little bit more about why pleasure is so important? And then I want to dig into pleasure practices.
Yeah. So I think that, when I grew up, pleasure was seen as either a reward or a distraction. So it was never the path. And what I've come to realize is that really pleasure is the path. It is the things, the desires that the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, gives us, I truly believe are the doorway to our destiny. And so pleasure are those little breadcrumbs that remind us that we are on that path of our purpose. And that what I say more succinctly is pleasure is what propels us to our purpose. It is the path that leads us there. And so the more in alignment that we are, and I think a lot of people get scared of oh my gosh, I'm just going to be a hedonist. I'm just going to be laying in bed till noon every day, drinking bottles of wine. And it's okay, are we on that, or does that really bring you pleasure? Because I think that people just haven't really stopped to think about like, what brings me joy? Like, what makes me happy? And when we really start to do that, which is what the pleasure practice is all about, is finding those little things, just moving the needle a little bit. So one of the examples that I give in the book is like if you're a coffee drinker, absolutely when you don't just like put your cup under, slam it down, go to work or take it with you in the car, and you're just like, okay, focus on 25 other things. Like you sit there with it. Like you inhale the aroma, like you anticipate the taste that is going to like percolate in your mouth, and just feel those sensations just flood your body. And that's it. That's all you have to do. It doesn't have to be where you're like, I'm getting massages and bath bombs and all of these crazy, which I very much appreciate, practices. It's about the little things in life. Like my kids, when I hear them laugh, like I stop and I pay attention to that. That is a pleasure practice where I'm registering that sensation of just joy in my body and in my heart, because I get to hear my healthy kids laugh.
Yeah. I love that it's not like pleasure. I think you're right. A lot of people think about it as like an intimate act or a sexual act, but this is really just any simple thing that brings you joy. And I talked about this a lot in the podcast, but the word I use is savoring, like really allowing yourself to like just pause and soak it up and be present enough. And I loved your example of the coffee. It's like, you're right. So many of us like slug the coffee, or like we don't even like stop to sniff the coffee or like smell it, or let the steam hit your face and just bask in it, really. Yeah. So for anyone starting out, like, is there a particular exercise to start building out pleasure practices? And like, I don't know, to me, I'm like, like trying to aim for 5 a day sounds really good, but that's my masculine. Like, how many practices should we build into our routine? I'd love to just hear your thoughts on starting out and how to get clarity on what is a pleasure for you.
I think one of the things that you can do is take an evaluation of your current habits. So if I know that every morning at 7 a.m. I'm coming down and making coffee, I don't have to add anything to that, but I do need to be present. I do need to think about, okay, how can I turn this into a pleasure practice? Instead of taking away things, like adding things, or just kind of changing it just a little bit so that you can make it work for you. So one of the things to think about as you were talking about, we were discussing the coffee analogy, is the anticipation. Like, I really want to focus on like how excited I am about the coffee that is currently brewing. And like that, because then we see that anticipation can also be translated into the bedroom. Like, man, I'm getting really excited about the idea of like, yes, sex is scheduled for like Tuesdays at 7. That doesn't mean it has to like, oh my gosh, it's on my calendar. It's like,
wait, that's too masculine for me.
Well, actually, I mean, not to get off topic, but I find that for some people, scheduling sex takes the pressure off. Because then they don't feel like, okay, I'm going to be propositioned every night and I need to say yes at least 2 nights a week. Like if I know that like, hey, I'm not going to be, quote, bothered, these other nights, that I can just kind of rest and relax and not feel, again, that pressure to perform, which is topic. I know that, okay, like Tuesday, it's going to happen Tuesday. And like, I can show up and I can, do what I need to do. So for some people that they really find it beneficial, other people, they're like, that's too much for me. I can't do. But the anticipation thing, when we get excited about like, man, I can't wait to go watch my kid play today. Like, oh gosh, can't wait for them to play basketball. And it's going to be so fun to cheer them on. It's those kind of things that you can just tweak a little bit, and you're not really like, I don't have to go meditate for like 3 hours, and I don't have to like light candles or burn incense. Like I can keep my routine, but just be present in it. and allow my body to fully experience it.
Yeah, and this is kind of going back to full circle of being worthy of receiving that self-love and that appreciation. It like you don't have to add anything, you don't have to do anything differently, but it's just looking at it with a different lens of, okay, given what I have and what is surrounding me already and what I already do, how do I just start to appreciate it
Absolutely.
and allow myself to enjoy this? Because I imagine that over time is also sending signals to your body of like, this is safe and this feels good. And you start to basically rewire that thinking and that feeling of like, I'm not worthy or I'm unlovable or I can't receive love to like slowly with micro actions or micro repetition. It's like just elevating your whole body and your consciousness to be like, this is possible for me. Yeah. Or I am already receiving this and I like it.
Yes, it does. It's like what we talked about earlier with relationships. It's developing that skill. It's like training that muscle to be able to tolerate and then start to crave in a way like, yeah, it's safe for me. One of the things I see sometimes with women is who have a hard time orgasming is that fear of letting go. Like it feels really scary, and that flood of, your body like awakening and opening, that feels really unsafe and really scary. And so when we start to titrate it in a way where I'm like, man, this feels good to just sit and feel good. Like, gosh, I can do that. Okay. Like it's okay for me to just feel this pleasure in this moment right now while I'm watching my kids play or I'm listening to this beautiful bird, like sing this song or watching the sunset. Like, wow, I'm allowing myself, my mind and my body to become on board and to become one. And then, yeah, okay, that feels safe. Nothing is disappearing. It's not going to, suddenly be taken away from me. And so I think that, if we can titrate it and allow ourselves to slowly open up to applying it to, like you said, like that inner part of us, that worthiness level.
Yeah, that edging practice is so helpful because I think a lot of people do feel like they have to go like 0 to 180 in an orgasm, right? Like that's a big leap. But these small titrations really help get you to that space where you feel safe enough.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. And I feel like that goes back to, I think a lot of women, this expectation, especially with pornography, is like, you're supposed to perform or like give the man that's like what it is in all the videos, right? Yeah. And so it's like, this is really just allowing yourself to have that first, not have the expectation of pleasing another person, but like really starting with yourself is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of people who are like, I do also enjoy pleasing my partner. So it's not that you have to abandon, but they can be mutually like exist together.
Yeah, both.
Yeah. You can have both. I can want to please my partner and I can also want to receive pleasure from them too. And it doesn't have to be, oh, this is always about you. It's always about me. It's really about, again, those expectations of what does a quote successful sexual encounter, intimate encounter look like for you?
Yeah. I'm just thinking right now about some of the Facebook groups I'm in. I'm like in a lot of mom groups and this is why I just have so much anecdotes for you.
Yeah,
but like, it's reminding me of like some posts I see about how a woman feels like she's never satisfied. And, it's almost like they do a quickie and it's like their partner is just trying to get an orgasm. And then it's like, okay, well, what about me? And this goes back to like having conversations. So I'm just curious, like for couples, what are some key questions that they need to sit down if they really want to get into like more of a healthy intimacy? What are some key questions to have each other explore?
I think it's hard because a lot of people struggle with communication in general.
Yeah.
They struggle even more when it comes to sexual communication.
Yeah.
So writing down some questions beforehand, but really examining what is the purpose and why I'm asking these questions. So if I have a lot of resentment towards my partner's sexual performance or their sexual behaviors or habits, that will become evident really fast if I'm starting to ask them questions. And so we either have to do that work on our own first to be like, okay, I need to come to peace with this. I need to figure out a way to process this. And I also want to work on our sexual relationship. And so I think one of the one of the questions to ask your partner is like, hey, like, what do you enjoy about being like sexual with me? And I don't want to use the word have sex with me because I think that really limits it. Because I know some individuals who are just like, I love the foreplay. Like, I don't like the sex itself is fine. I mean, yeah, an orgasm's nice, but like, I love the tension or I love the cuddling. Like, I just love like being naked with my partner and feeling their skin on mine. And like, that really meets my needs the most. And so I think that when we give ourselves permission and are honest to share, like, I guess I just thought that like, that's what you're supposed to do. Like, you just like bang it out like a couple times a week and like, that's good, right? You know, if we've never really sat and thought about what does sex do for us? Why are we even, what role does it play in our relationship? And look at the more high level questions. And then from there, that will really start to guide those lower level questions in terms of frequency, in terms of, hey, you know, like I feel neglected. Like, I don't feel like my sexual needs matter. Or when you orgasm and sex is over, it makes me feel sad because my sexual needs didn't get met. And a lot of times what I have noticed is that, especially in heterosexual relationships, is that men really do want to please their partners, but they have been put off and told, oh no, don't worry about me. No, it's fine. Like, I'm good. You don't need to worry about me tonight. You don't need to worry about me. That they just stop asking because it feels like a rejection over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the communication piece is so beautiful. And I think this is just another tool. Like, something that I really love is nonviolent communication, or NVC. Mm-hmm. I love how there's like acronyms for all these tools. Yeah. But it really is like having the boldness and the courage to not make it a like pointing fingers or like placing blame, but really talking about it from the I feel perspective, or like, this is what I noticed. This is what my unmet need is, or my desire. And then coming up with a request or possibly an action. But what I loved about your example there is it wasn't ever any blaming. Like, you're so selfish. Like, you just, you know, take care of yourself and then you leave me hanging. Like, you know, it's said so beautifully. And to me, like, when you're able to be honest and open and vulnerable, that is the intimacy. Like, that brings you even closer. And sometimes I think people are, especially if they feel like they're lacking in self-worth or self-love, like, conflict is the scariest thing because it's like, no, I'm going to like potentially set myself up to be abandoned, or like, this person's going to walk from me. But just knowing like you are capable of having that conversation and getting your needs met too, in a way that doesn't lead to conflict, or it's not in a manner, I think can be very liberating for a lot of people. But we're not taught these tools. Like, we're not taught to communicate.
No. Yeah. And I think too, like, what I have found that a lot of men are receptive to those kinds of conversations about sex. I mean, nobody is receptive to like, you're such a selfish
like criticism.
Yeah. Like, yes. When we feel criticized, that triggers shame in us. And then and then we start to blame the other person. And then it becomes this cycle. And so, and no constructive things come from those kinds of conversations or situations. And so if we can say, I want to have a conversation about how to feel more, about how to improve our sex life, or have more intense sex, or sex more often, or basically how to improve and make things better. I've worked with a lot of couples where the man is like, I can't believe she came to me and was like, I really want to improve our sex life. Like, no one is upset about that.
Get on board with that.
Yes.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for all of your openness about this topic. I think it's so important. And like I said, it's just such a big part of us as human beings and the way that we're wired biologically that it's too important not to talk about. And I love that you have a whole book. So share with us where we can find you or what you want people to do after listening to this.
Yeah. So you can find me at Courtney Boyer Coaching, Courtney with a C, on all the social media places. And then my website is CourtneyBoyerCoaching.com. And then my book, Not Tonight, Honey, is on almost all the major online retailer, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, some independent bookstores as well. What do I want people to do? Oh, let's see. I want them to look in the mirror and tell themselves, even if they have to like fake it, to say, I am worthy of pleasure.
Yeah. And do a pleasure practice today, after listening to this episode.
Yes. And feel free to message me and tell me what pleasure practice you did, because I love hearing from people that are incorporating like their pleasure practices that are creating a more pleasure-filled life. Gosh, that like seriously makes my day.
Yeah. And that's something that I've learned recently because I've been so like type A, like Enneagram 3, like just achieve and like just all work, no play. And I've been really working on increasing the pleasure in my life. And that honestly has unlocked so much in terms of just my overall being, how I look at life. Like I have so much more energy. I really appreciate, and I've always been kind of like a sunny disposition and like the glass is half full, but like, I don't know, I just have a newfound appreciation for life. And so I highly recommend it to everyone. And you may have touched on this, but I'm curious how you would cultivate more joy in your life.
I think one, giving yourself permission to like, it's okay for me to cultivate more joy. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Obviously, figuring out what has kind of stopped me. But I would say that the thing that like find the humor. I think that a lot of people, if they struggle with incorporating like ecstatic, warm and fuzzy feelings, that might feel a little unsafe. But a lot of people can be more open to humor. And so if you find yourself laughing at something, celebrate that as joy.
Mm-hmm. Even if it's laughing at yourself, like you just tripped and
yes, you're like, oh my gosh,
I always laugh at myself.
Everybody just saw me do that. I'm okay. It just, or you come, like sometimes girlfriends that will send me reels, and I just laugh so much. Like sometimes we'll cry and I'm like, man, I am so grateful for the ability to just sit and laugh and just, that's creating joy.
Yeah. Laughter is a very potent energy for sure. And yeah, you're right. You could just go like hashtag real or hashtag humor on reels and just go down that rabbit hole or go down Reddit. There's a subreddit called Maybe. And that one is so funny. It's just like videos of the most ridiculous thing. Yeah. Go check it out.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for your wisdom today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed it and you're not following me on social media already, come follow me and join the conversation on our latest post. I'm over at Cultivate, or you can visit our website, cultivate.com, and learn more. And don't forget to hit subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss another episode. I can't wait to connect with you again soon. Have a joyful day.